And so, moving on in Kant to the second half of the book, the Transcendental Dialectic, we're going to move now into a higher sphere of knowledge, a higher sphere of ideas. Kant makes a distinction in this chapter, first of all, between transcendent and transcendental. Transcendent is that which refers to something that is beyond the bounds of a possible experience. And so the sciences are not concerned with anything transcendent. But transcendental refers to something which makes experience possible, and science is very much concerned, as Kant has just spent the first half of the book demonstrating, it is very much concerned with the transcendental, with that which makes experience possible, by bringing the sense intuitions under the unity of the concepts and their universal rules of understanding. So the understanding is immanent. It's concerned with immanental things, whereas the ideas of the reason will be concerned with transcendent things. He calls the ideas of the reason transcendental ideas, which I think is a bit confusing and a bit of a misnomer. They should really be called transcendent ideas, since they refer to something beyond the bounds of any possible experience. And the categories of the understanding should be understood as transcendental or as immanent, even. Either way will do. So we begin with that distinction, and then by reason now. So what the understanding does is it confers synthetic unity upon the manifold of the sense data that is given to it by the imagination in combination with the material data of the senses. And it brings that data under the synthetic unity given to it by concepts that determine the universal rules that organize that data in a meaningful picture that constructs a pure scientific object. But what the reason does now is something different. The reason has no relationship with the external world. It's not concerned so much with objects of sense data. What it does is it confers synthetic unity upon the manifold of the various rules and concepts of the understanding, just as the understanding confers in turn synthetic unity upon our sense intuitions. And so the reason is concerned with the faculty of principles, whereas the understanding was concerned with universal rules. But these principles are ultimate. They are the ultimate principles. They are the unconditioned that subsumes all the conditions provided by the understanding to it. And so reason is concerned with the unconditioned, with the absolute, with the ultimate. And the logical employment of reason is basically a faculty of inference. If we think of a syllogism in which we have a major and a minor premise, we have our major premise that all men are mortal, and our minor premise that Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. The conclusion is an inference furnished by the reason, whereas the two premises are furnished by the understanding, because the understanding is concerned with universal rules. Whereas the reason is concerned with bringing those rules under the subsumption of unconditioned principles. So it proceeds from the conditioned to the unconditioned in an ascent. And so in syllogistic reasoning, we have a sort of two-step dialectic between the understanding and the reason. The understanding furnishing the conditioned, and the reason the unconditioned, the absolute. So it's concerned with inferences. If I say that the three lines of a triangle enclose three angles, that's immediate. But if I say that those three angles add up to the sum total of 180 degrees, that's an inference, and the reason is required for that. So the reason is concerned with inferences, but with ultimate ones that ultimately subsume and give unity, totality, to the rules of the understanding. So notice that the structure of the book, too, replicates this. It moves from the transcendental aesthetic, which is concerned with the senses, to the understanding, which is concerned with conferring synthetic unity upon material furnished to the understanding by the senses, to the reason, which is now going to be concerned with furnishing synthetic unity to the rules of the understanding by applying the big ideas, God, freedom, and immortality, to it. So we're gradually ascending from the sensory world as we read this book into the realm of metaphysics. Because this is what reason does. It moves in an ever higher ascending spiral of higher and higher ideas that have larger and larger and larger validity. And so the ideas will be concerned then with this ultimate unity, and the ideas really mean the same thing as more or less as Plato's archetypes. I suppose if we were living in Greek days, instead of God, we would have the gods as our primary concern here. But to the transcendental ideas, then, we have these. Recall that the most important category now of the quantity-quality relation and modality will be the category of relation for the ideas, because their three subcategories will furnish its primary material. The three subcategories were substance and accident, cause and effect, and reciprocity. And those will furnish, there are three different types of syllogisms, too, that correspond to that. The categorical syllogism, the hypothetical syllogism, and the disjunctive syllogism, all of which correspond to those three categories. And there will accordingly be, then, for the reason, three different classes of its objects. So if we say that our representations have, they refer to three different areas. They either refer to the subject, they refer to the object, or they refer to all things, which is, again, these three categories. And so we should have then according to these, corresponding to these three categories, we should have, corresponding to substance accident, we should have matters concerning the soul. The soul is a substance, and it will furnish us with the idea of the reason of immortality. And corresponding to the category of cause and effect, then we will have the discipline of cosmology that will furnish us with the category of freedom, because the free is that which is not determined by causality. It's ultimately the unconditioned that makes the conditions of the cause and effect possible, freedom. And in the third category of reciprocity, we will have the ultimate being of beings, God, who makes all things possible. This will be the discipline of theology, and this will be the third idea. So we have the three ideas of reason are immortality, freedom, and God, and they correspond to the three subdivisions, or the three classes of, three disciplines basically, of psychology, cosmology, and theology. Those are, of course, the domains of ritual, symbol, and myth, and religion. And we're going to move now into a concern with that. And Schelling will later be, he will be one of the German philosophers, almost the only one in the group that will see the necessity that this will lead to found a science of comparative mythology. And so the bridge between German idealist philosophy and comparative mythology will be Schelling's work in founding a science of comparative mythology that studies these ideas. But this is how Kant breaks it down. So the reason and his definition, whereas his definition of the idea is that both the understanding and the reason have concepts. We had for the pure concepts of the understanding the categories, and so for the ideas of the pure reason now we have the ideas, and the definition of an idea is a necessary concept to which no sensory correlate can be given to the concept. So the ideas, and they're not superfluous. Kant is not going to say that the ideas of the reason, because unlike science, they don't have physical objects that correspond to them that can be given to us in a possible experience, they're therefore useless. That's not the case at all. The whole point of this critique is precisely the essentiality, the necessity of the ideas of the reason. We cannot afford as human beings to dispense with the idea of God, the idea of freedom, the idea of the soul. We simply cannot do that. But these ideas have a different function. They don't function in the scientific domain of the pure understanding, which is concerned with knowledge. In metaphysics, we have something else going on, something that Kant will later call a regulative function. The ideas of the pure reason have a regulative function to them that is necessary, because after all, they go in quest of the unconditioned. They are that propensity of the human psyche to go in quest of the ultimate, the absolute. And of course, Hegel will derive his idea of the absolute here from Kant's use of the reason as that faculty, which goes in quest of the absolute, the unconditioned, that makes all other conditions possible and that leads up to them. So we have the pure concepts of the understanding, the categories, which correspond to sensory experience and are nothing without them, as we have seen in the chart of the anti-object. And we have the transcendental ideas of the reason. Kant calls the ideas of the reason transcendental ideas, and I think that's a misnomer. He should call them transcendent ideas, since by definition, they don't have any kind of sense correlate, and they don't make any kind of sensory experience possible. He's already defined the transcendental as that which points downward into this world and makes experience possible, and is the proper domain of the categories of the pure understanding, whereas the transcendent points up to the other world, the ultimate realm, the realm of metaphysics. The whole point for doing all of this, for doing natural science, for learning about nature, is to study the machine of God's mind, his creation. So Kant is not a philosopher that supports and upholds an atheistic point of view. He's not that type of mind, and his philosophy cannot be used to defend atheism, but can be used to separate science from metaphysics and to give each its proper and respective domain. And so that's why he's still worth studying. He had a keener understanding of the differences between metaphysics and physics than any other philosopher, I think, in history. And so we move in the first half of the book. The Transcendental Analytic was the book that was concerned with physics, the applications of the categories to sensory experience that makes that experience possible. And now we move to metaphysics, the domain of the ultimate ideas of pure reason.